What if the most dangerous thing you could teach a child is the truth? I don't mean lying to them. I mean telling them the truth too early, before they've built the walls they'll need, before they've learned that knowing something and surviving something are two completely different skills. Because this story is about a boy who believed, truly, deeply, in the marrow of his bones believed, that every person on this planet is good. And this story is about what happened when the world heard that belief and answered. His name was Jonah. Jonah Watts. And the first thing you need to understand about Jonah is that he wasn't naive. I know that's what you're thinking. You're picturing a soft kid. Sheltered. The kind of boy who grew up behind a white picket fence with 2 golden retrievers and a mother who pre-cut his sandwiches into triangles until he was 14. That's not Jonah. Jonah grew up in Redfield, Ohio. A town that used to make steel and now mostly makes excuses. His father, Dale, worked at the packing plant on Route 9, 12-hour shifts, 6 days a week, standing on a concrete floor cutting and wrapping meat until his back seized so badly that some mornings he had to roll out of bed sideways like a man escaping a sinking boat. His mother, Patricia, Patty, everyone called her Patty, worked at the front desk of a motel called the Ridgeline that sat on the edge of the highway and catered mostly to truckers and people who were either running from something or hadn't figured out yet that they should be. Patty was kind. That's the word everyone used. Kind. Not smart, though she was. Not strong, though she was that too. Kind. The way some people are tall. It wasn't a choice. It was just how she was built. She made soup for neighbors who didn't ask for it. She remembered birthdays that other people forgot. She let truckers at the motel use the lobby phone for free when the payphone outside ate their quarters, and she never once made them feel like they owed her anything for it. And Jonah was Patty's son the way a river is a mountain's son. He came from her. He carried her in him. He moved the way she moved, toward people, not away. By the time Jonah was 8, he had a reputation in Redfield. Teachers talked about him. Not in the concerned, this kid needs intervention way. In the wondering way. The way you talk about something you can't quite explain. Jonah was the kid who sat next to the kid nobody sat next to. Every class has that kid, the one with the stained shirt or the bad smell or the stutter or the dad who got arrested or the mom who showed up drunk to the Christmas play. The kid who exists in a social quarantine that children enforce with the ruthless precision of tiny dictators. Jonah sat next to that kid. Every time. Not because a teacher told him to. Not because Patty had given him a lecture about inclusivity. He just did it. Like it was obvious. Like there was no other seat that made sense. When someone asked him why, and people did ask, because his behavior was unusual enough to provoke curiosity, Jonah would say something that, coming from an 8-year-old, sounded either profound or insane depending on how you felt about children. He'd say, because they looked like they needed someone to sit there. That's it. That's the whole philosophy. They looked like they needed someone. And Jonah appointed himself the someone. In 3rd grade, he befriended a boy named Travis Dunmore. Travis was the town cautionary tale in miniature. His father was in prison for armed robbery, his mother worked 3 jobs and was never home, and Travis himself was the kind of kid who set small fires in the woods behind the school and threw rocks at cars from the overpass. Not because he was evil. Because he was 9 and full of a rage he couldn't name and nobody had ever bothered to help him find the words. Teachers avoided Travis the way you avoid a wasp, not out of cruelty, just self-preservation. The other kids gave him a wide berth. Even the bus driver watched him in the rearview mirror like he was a package that might be ticking. But Jonah sat next to Travis on the bus every day. And at first, Travis tested him. The way Travis tested everyone, with hostility, with provocation, with the small cruelties that children use to measure whether an offered hand is real or a trap. He called Jonah names. He stole his lunch. He once shoved Jonah into a locker so hard that Jonah's lip split and bled onto his shirt. And Jonah, and this is the part that makes adults uncomfortable, because it challenges everything we think we know about healthy boundaries and self-protection, Jonah came back the next day. Sat in the same seat, same bus, next to Travis. And Travis looked at him. And Jonah looked at Travis. And neither of them said anything. But something shifted. The way tectonic plates shift, not with a visible crack, just a low, deep movement that changes the landscape without anyone noticing until later. By the end of that school year, Travis wasn't setting fires anymore. He wasn't throwing rocks. He was sitting next to Jonah on the bus, and they were reading comic books together. Cheap ones, the kind you get at the grocery store spinner rack, and Travis was laughing. Actually laughing. Not the jagged, barking laugh of a kid performing aggression. The soft laugh. The real one. The one that comes from the belly when something is genuinely funny and you feel safe enough to let it out. Patty saw this. And she was proud. But she was also, and I want to be honest about this, because Patty's complexity is important to this story, she was also afraid. Not of Travis. Of the pattern. Because she recognized it. She recognized it because she lived it. Patty was kind to everyone. And that kindness had cost her. In ways she didn't talk about. In ways that lived in the silences between her words and the extra lock she'd installed on the motel's back door and the scar on her left wrist that she covered with a watch and never explained. Patty knew, from experience, from bruises both visible and not, that the world does not always reward kindness. That the world, in fact, sometimes treats kindness as an invitation. An opening. A soft place to land a fist. But how do you tell your 8-year-old son that the thing that makes him most beautiful is also the thing that makes him most vulnerable? How do you say, your heart is a gift, but not everyone deserves it, and some people will take it and break it and hand you back the pieces like they're doing you a favor? How do you teach a child to be good without teaching him to be a target? Patty didn't know. So she did what parents do when they don't know. She watched. And she waited. And she hoped that the lessons would arrive gently. That the world would teach Jonah about its edges without cutting him too deep. But hope is not a strategy. And the world is not gentle. It's not cruel, either. It's just indifferent. And indifference, when it collides with someone who gives everything, can do more damage than malice ever could. Jonah grew up. The way all kids grow up, in sudden lurches and slow crawls, in growth spurts that outpace shoes and in emotional developments that lag behind the body by years. By 13, he was tall, thin, all elbows and knees, the way boys are at that age, like a sketch that hasn't been colored in yet. He had his mother's eyes. Brown. Warm. The kind of eyes that make strangers tell you things they wouldn't tell their therapist. He was in 8th grade. And 8th grade is, let me just say this, 8th grade is the Colosseum of American childhood. It's where the empire decides who lives and who dies. The social hierarchies harden like concrete. The categories become iron. You're popular or you're not. You're cool or you're weird. You're in or you're out. and the transition from being a kid who sits next to anyone to being a teenager who must choose sides. That transition is a meat grinder. Jonah didn't choose sides. He refused. He continued to sit with anyone. He ate lunch with the theater kids on Monday and the athletes on Tuesday and the quiet girl who drew horses in her notebook on Wednesday and the kid in the wheelchair on Thursday, and on Friday he sat alone because sometimes he needed to be alone, and he'd learned, this is important, he'd learned that being alone by choice is very different from being alone by exile. The other kids didn't know what to make of him. He didn't fit any category. He wasn't a nerd or a jock or a burnout or a prep. He was just Jonah, the kid who talked to everyone, the kid who seemed to genuinely like people. All people, which, at 13, is either a superpower or a death sentence. And then he met Owen Garrett. Owen was new, transferred in October from a school district 2 counties over. The kind of mid-semester transfer that usually means one of 3 things: a parent got a new job, a parent got a divorce, or something happened at the old school that nobody wants to talk about. In Owen's case, it was the third one. Nobody knew the details. But the rumors arrived before Owen did, the way rumors always do: fast, distorted, feeding on themselves like fire on oxygen. Something about a fight. Something about a threat. Something about Owen being troubled. That word that adults use when they mean dangerous but don't want to say it out loud in a school building. Owen was 14. Big for his age. Not fat. Solid. The kind of kid who looked like he'd been assembled from heavier materials than everyone else. He had dark hair that fell over his eyes like a curtain he kept drawn on purpose. He didn't smile. Not in a brooding, performative way. In a clinical way. Like the muscles required for smiling had been disconnected from the circuit. He sat alone. At lunch. In class. On the bus. He radiated a field of stay away that was so strong it was almost visible, a force field made of silence and eye contact that lasted half a second too long, and the particular kind of stillness that animals have right before they bite. Naturally, Jonah sat next to him. It happened on Owen's 3rd day. Lunch period. The cafeteria at Redfield Middle School smelled like it always smelled. Like institutional beef and floor cleaner and the low-frequency anxiety of 300 teenagers trying to survive another 45 minutes of social navigation. Owen was at a table in the back corner. Alone. Eating a sandwich he'd brought from home, wrapped in a plastic bag. Not a lunchbox. A plastic grocery bag. Which told you something about the household even before you asked. Jonah walked over. Set his tray down. Saturday. Hey, he said. I'm Jonah. Owen looked at him. That half-second too long look. I didn't ask you to sit here. I know. The other tables are full. They weren't. There were at least 4 tables with open seats. Owen knew this. Jonah knew Owen knew. I don't want company, Owen said. Okay. I'll be quiet. And Jonah ate his lunch. In silence. Next to a kid who had told him to leave. And Owen, who had expected pushback, who had expected an argument, who had expected the interaction to follow the script that every interaction in his life had always followed, which was, person approaches, person gets pushed away, person leaves, loneliness confirmed, hypothesis validated. Owen was confused. Because Jonah didn't leave. He didn't push. He didn't argue. He just stayed. Quietly. Eating a ham sandwich and drinking a carton of milk and existing in the same space without demanding anything. And that confused Owen more than aggression would have. Because Owen knew how to handle aggression. He'd been handling aggression his whole life. What he didn't know how to handle was someone who simply chose to be near him. It took 3 weeks. 3 weeks of Jonah showing up at that table. 3 weeks of silence that gradually, almost imperceptibly, developed small perforations. A comment about the food, a question about a class, a shared observation about the math teacher's tie, which was always stained and always a different color and had become a running joke in the school that Owen hadn't been included in until Jonah included him. By November, they were friends. Or something like friends. Something cautious and provisional and built on the understanding that Owen could shut the door at any time and Jonah would stand outside it without knocking. They walked home together sometimes. They lived in the same direction, Owen in an apartment complex on Miller Street that was slowly losing its battle with structural neglect, Jonah in a small house on Elm that his parents rented for $780 a month. They didn't talk about big things. They talked about small things. Video games Owen couldn't afford but watched people play on the internet. A stray cat that lived behind the packing plant that Jonah had been feeding hot dogs to for a month. A movie coming out in December that they both wanted to see but neither had the money for. Small things. Safe things. The vocabulary of two boys learning to trust each other through the exchange of harmless information. And Jonah with his warm brown eyes and his mother's heart and his belief, his stubborn, beautiful, dangerous belief that all people are good. Jonah didn't see the signs. He didn't see them because he wasn't looking for them. You only see what you believe exists. And Jonah didn't believe in bad people. He believed in hurt people. He believed that behind every cold shoulder was a wound. Behind every fist was a fear. Behind every kid who set fires or threw rocks or sat alone in a corner like a coiled spring was a story that, if you could just hear it, would explain everything. And he was right. He was absolutely right. Behind Owen Garrett's silence was a story. A story of a father who drank and hit and disappeared and came back and drank and hit again. A story of a mother who endured until she couldn't and then left, taking Owen's younger sister but not Owen, because, and this is the part that Owen never said out loud but carried in his body like shrapnel, because Owen reminded her of his father. She took the daughter. She left the son. The daughter was soft. The son was solid. And the mother, in a moment of survival-driven calculus that she would spend the rest of her life regretting, decided that soft was worth saving and solid could take care of itself. Owen was 11 when his mother left. He'd been taking care of himself since then. 3 years. Living with a father who cycled between absence and violence with the predictability of weather. Going to school with the kind of focus that comes not from ambition but from the need to be somewhere, anywhere, that wasn't home. And carrying, always carrying, the specific kind of rage that belongs to children who have been abandoned by the person who was supposed to protect them. Jonah didn't know any of this. Not in detail. He sensed it, the way he sensed everything, with his radar for pain, his antenna for need. But he didn't know the specifics. And because he didn't know the specifics, he didn't understand the full dimensions of what he was walking toward. Because here's the truth about hurt people, and I'm going to say this clearly because the rest of this story depends on you understanding it. Hurt people are not just people who need love. They are also people who have been wired, by their hurt, to reject it, to test it, to destroy it. Not because they want to. Because the hurt has taught them that love is a setup. That kindness is the first act of a play that ends in betrayal. That the hand extended in friendship is the same hand that will eventually become a fist. And the more they want to believe otherwise, the more they want to trust, The more they want to let someone in, the harder they fight against it. Because hope is the most dangerous thing a hurt person can feel. Hope means vulnerability. And vulnerability, for someone like Owen, meant blood. It was December. A Friday. Cold. The kind of Ohio cold that doesn't just lower the temperature but seems to lower the entire mood of the world, like someone turned down the brightness on reality. Jonah and Owen were walking home from school. They'd been talking, not just small talk, but real talk, the kind that happens when two people have spent enough time in silence that the silence starts to crack and things seep through. Owen had told Jonah something. Not about his father. Not about his mother. Something smaller. Something that, in context, was enormous. He told Jonah he was scared. Not of anything specific. Just scared. The ambient, directionless fear of a kid who has learned that the world is unreliable and who wakes up every morning into uncertainty and goes to sleep every night knowing that certainty is a luxury he can't afford. "I'm scared like all the time," Owen said. And he said it the way you say something you've never said before, haltingly, testing each word like it might be a landmine. Like even right now. Walking home. "I'm scared." Jonah listened. Didn't interrupt. Didn't fix. Just walked and listened and let Owen's words exist in the air without grabbing them or redirecting them or doing any of the things that adults do when children tell them something frightening. "That sounds really heavy," Jonah said. "It is. Can I help?" "I don't think so." "Okay. But I'm here. If you want to talk more. Or if you don't. Either way." Owen nodded. And for a moment, a single, crystalline moment, something in Owen's face opened. The curtain parted. The force field dropped. And Jonah saw him. The real him. Not the solid, silent, stay-away Owen. The scared one. The 11-year-old whose mother left. The kid who reminded his mother of a monster and had spent every day since wondering if she was right. And Jonah, with the instinct of a boy who had never learned to be cautious because caution felt like cruelty, Jonah put his arm around Owen's shoulder. A side hug. The kind that 13-year-old boys give when they don't have words but want to say something with their bodies. It lasted maybe 2 seconds. And it broke something in Owen that had been holding for a very long time. Not in a good way. In the way that a dam breaks. Not controlled. Not gradual. Total. Owen shoved Jonah. Hard. Both hands against Jonah's chest. Jonah stumbled backward, off the sidewalk, into the street. He fell. Landed on his back on the asphalt. The wind left his lungs. Stars. Actual stars, the kind your brain invents when your skull hits something harder than it is. Owen stood over him, breathing hard, fists clenched, eyes wild, not angry, terrified. The way animals look when they've been cornered and the only option left is to attack. "Don't touch me," Owen screamed. "Don't ever touch me. You don't know me. You don't know me. You think you can just sit next to someone and eat your stupid sandwich and act like everything's fine? Nothing's fine. Nothing. And you with your nice mom and your nice house and your stupid nice everything, you don't get to feel sorry for me. You don't get to fix me. I'm not your project." Every word was a wound. Not because Owen meant them as weapons, though they functioned as weapons. Because Owen meant them as walls. He was building in real time. Throwing up bricks as fast as he could because the hug, that 2-second one-armed innocent hug, had gotten inside the perimeter and everything in Owen's survival training was screaming, "Intruder! Close the gates! Protect the core!" Jonah lay on the asphalt, lip bleeding again, like third grade, like Travis, like history repeating itself with different characters and the same blood. He looked up at Owen, and in his eyes, in those warm brown Patty Sun eyes, there was no anger, no resentment, no self-pity. There was hurt, real hurt, deep hurt, the kind of hurt that comes not from being shoved, but from being misunderstood, from giving everything you have and watching it be received as an attack, from reaching out and having your hand slapped away by the very person who needed it most. Owen stared down at him, chest heaving, fists still clenched. And then the adrenaline broke. The way adrenaline always breaks, suddenly, completely, leaving you standing in the wreckage of what you just did with no understanding of how you got there. Owen looked at Jonah on the ground, looked at his own hands, and ran, just ran, down the street, around the corner, gone. Jonah lay there for a minute, maybe two. Then he sat up, wiped his lip, tasted copper, stood, and walked home, alone. He didn't tell Patty what happened. She saw the lip. He said he tripped. She didn't believe him. Patty never believed "I tripped," because she'd said "I tripped" too many times herself to ever believe it from someone else, but she didn't push. She cleaned the cut, put a butterfly bandage on it, and held him for a moment. Just held him. And Jonah let himself be held. Which, if you're paying attention, was something Owen couldn't do. Something Owen's body had been programmed to reject. Something that Jonah had tried to give and Owen had experienced as violence. Think about that. A hug, received as violence. A kindness, processed as a threat. The same gesture, one arm, 2 seconds, a body saying "I'm here," interpreted through two completely different operating systems. Jonah's system read it as comfort. Owen's system read it as danger. And neither system was wrong. That's the devastating part. Neither system was wrong. They were both accurate responses to the worlds they'd been built in. Owen didn't come to school on Monday, or Tuesday, or Wednesday. By Thursday, Jonah was worried. Not scared, worried. The way Jonah was worried about the stray cat when it didn't show up for 3 days. The way Jonah was worried about the planet and the ozone and the bees and every other thing that existed in a state of quiet emergency that most people had learned to ignore. He went to Owen's apartment. After school. Miller Street. Building C. 3rd floor. Apartment 312. He'd never been inside. Owen had never invited him. The door to 312 was closed. Jonah knocked. Nothing. Knocked again. Owen. It's Jonah. Silence. But not empty silence. The silence of someone on the other side of a door deciding whether to open it. Owen, I'm not mad. I'm not mad about Friday. I just want to know you're okay. More silence. Then, very quietly, so quietly Jonah almost missed it, "Go away. I will. If you want me to. But first, are you okay?" A pause so long Jonah could hear his own heartbeat. No. One word. Through a closed door. And in that word, Jonah heard everything Owen couldn't say. Every night with a drunk father. Every morning without a mother. Every day in a new school full of strangers who'd already decided what he was before he opened his mouth. Every fist he'd clenched to keep from feeling. Every wall he'd built to keep from breaking. No. Can I come in? No. Can I sit out here? Another pause. Why? Because you said you're not okay. And I don't think being not okay alone is better than being not okay with someone sitting on the other side of your door. No response. But the silence changed. It became less empty, less like a wall and more like a window. Jonah sat down in the hallway, back against the wall, across from apartment 312. And he sat there for 2 hours. He didn't knock again. He didn't call through the door. He just sat. The way he'd sat next to Travis on the bus. The way he'd sat next to Owen in the cafeteria. Just present. Occupying the same space. Not demanding anything. At some point, he heard something from inside the apartment. Not words. A sound. A muffled sound. The sound of a 14-year-old boy crying as quietly as he could because he'd learned, the hard way, that crying loudly in his house was an invitation to something worse. Jonah heard it. And he sat with it. And he didn't try to fix it or enter or break down the door or call someone or do any of the things that the adult world says you should do when a child is in distress. He just sat. And he was there. And that was what he could give. That was his whole offering. Presence. Stupid, stubborn, unwavering presence. The presence of a boy who believed that all people are good. Even people who shove you into the street. Even people who scream at you for caring. Even people who lock doors and cry behind them. After 2 hours, Jonah stood up. His back was stiff. The hallway floor was cold. He leaned toward the door. I'm going home now. But I'll be at lunch tomorrow. Same table. If you want. He walked home. Patty asked where he'd been. He said he'd been studying at a friend's house. She didn't believe him. She never believed him when he used the word studying, because Jonah was the kind of kid who absorbed things without effort, which meant studying was never really necessary and therefore always suspicious. But she didn't push. She made dinner. They ate. Dale came home from the plant at 8:30, smelling like disinfectant and exhaustion. They watched television. Jonah went to bed. Normal night. Normal house. Normal life. The kind of normal that Owen Garrett would have traded everything he had for. The kind of normal that most people never appreciate until it's gone. Owen came to school on Friday. He walked into the cafeteria. Stood at the entrance. Scanned the room. Found the table in the back corner. Jonah was already there. Eating a ham sandwich. Drinking milk. Same as always. Owen walked over. Sat down. Didn't say anything. Didn't apologize. Didn't acknowledge the shove or the screaming or the 2 hours in the hallway. He just sat. And Jonah looked at him. And smiled. Not a big smile. Not a performative I told you so, see how patient was smile. A small one. The quiet kind. The kind that says, there you are. I was waiting. They ate lunch. In silence. And the silence was different from before. It was warmer. Denser. The silence of two people who had been through something together. Not a war, not a disaster, just the small, savage intimacy of one person pushing another away and the other person refusing to go. I could stop here. I could stop and tell you that the story has a happy ending. That Owen healed. That Jonah's belief was vindicated. That all people are good and love wins, and the kid who sits next to everyone changed the world one lunch table at a time. But I can't. Because the story doesn't end there. And what comes next is the thing that taught Jonah, really taught him, in his blood, in his scars, in the part of his heart that would never fully heal, what the world is actually made of. 3 months later, March. Jonah was walking home from school alone. Owen had stayed late for a makeup test. It was 3:30. The light was starting to go gold the way it does in early spring when the days are getting longer but winter is still holding on by its fingernails. He was passing the alley behind the hardware store on 5th Street, a narrow passage between 2 buildings that served as a shortcut to Elm and that Jonah had used 100 times without thinking about it because 13-year-olds don't think about alleys the way adults do. There were 2 boys in the alley. Older. 15, maybe 16. Jonah didn't know them. They didn't go to his school. They were from the high school, or maybe they didn't go to any school. They had that look. The look of kids who had already checked out of the systems designed to hold them. Hey! Jonah stopped. You got any money? No. Check your pockets. I don't have any money. The taller one stepped closer. I said check your pockets. Jonah felt it. For the first time in his life, he felt it. The thing that Patty had felt. The thing that Owen lived with every day. Fear. Not the ambient, philosophical fear of bad things exist in the world. The physical fear. The animal fear. The fear that starts in your stomach and floods your limbs and rewrites your brain's priorities in a fraction of a second from understand the situation to survive the situation. He reached into his pockets, pulled out what he had. A $1 bill. Some coins. A bus pass that Patty gave him for emergencies. The taller one took the money. The shorter one took the bus pass. And then, and this is the part that Jonah would relive, would replay, would try to rewrite in his mind every night for months, the taller one looked at him and smiled. Not a smile of satisfaction. Not a smile of cruelty. A smile of nothing. Blankness. The smile of someone who has detached the act from its meaning. Who takes from another person the way you take a napkin from a dispenser, without thought, without remorse, without the slightest registration that the napkin is a thing that matters. Thanks, kid. And he shoved Jonah into the wall. Not hard. Not like Owen. Casually. The way you shove a door that's in your way. And they walked off, laughing. About something else. About something that had nothing to do with Jonah. He was already forgotten. He was already nothing. Jonah stood in the alley, back against the brick. $1 and some coins poorer. A bus pass shorter. And something inside him, something that had been the core of him, the central operating system, the belief that had powered every act of kindness and every seat taken beside a lonely kid and every hour spent outside a locked door, that something cracked. Not broke. Not yet. Cracked. The difference matters. Because he went home. And he told Patty. And Patty, whose wrist had a scar she covered with a watch, Patty held him. And cried. Not because of the $1. Not because of the bus pass. Because she knew what he was feeling. She knew the exact shape of the realization that was forming in her son's mind. The realization she had prayed he would never have to reach. Not all people are good. He said it out loud that night. Lying in bed. Patty sitting on the edge. The way she used to sit when he was small and afraid of the dark. Mom, not everyone is good, are they? Not a question. A statement that needed confirmation but was afraid of it. And Patty, this is where Patty made the choice that defines this entire story. Patty could have confirmed it. She could have said, "No, baby, they're not." She could have said, "Some people are bad, some people will hurt you, and you need to learn to protect yourself." She could have given him the armor, the walls, the 31 years of hard evidence she had accumulated that proved, beyond any reasonable doubt, that the world contains people who will take your dollar and shove you into a wall and forget you before they reach the end of the alley. She could have ended his belief right there. And maybe she should have. But she didn't. She said something else. Something that Jonah wouldn't understand for years. Something that I need you to hold on to, because it's the key to the door we haven't reached yet. She said, "You're asking the wrong question, baby." What's the right question? The right question isn't whether all people are good. The right question is whether you are, and whether you'll stay that way. He didn't understand. Not at 13. Not lying in bed with a bruise on his shoulder from a brick wall and a hole in his pocket where a dollar used to be. He didn't understand. But he remembered. The way you remember things your mother says that don't make sense yet. You store them in a room you don't visit often, and then one day, years later, you open the door and find them sitting there, perfectly preserved, waiting for you to be old enough to need them. Years passed. Jonah grew up. High school, college, community college, 2 years, business administration, paid for with loans, and a job at a grocery store where he stocked shelves at 4 in the morning before class. He moved to Columbus. Got a job at a logistics company. Entry level. Cubicle. The kind of job that's not a career but a placeholder. He was 24. And he was different. Not hard. Not cynical. But cautious. The crack from the alley had deepened over the years. Not from a single event, but from the accumulation of small ones. A roommate who stole from him. A girlfriend who cheated. A manager who took credit for his work and smiled about it the way the boy in the alley had smiled, blankly, without registration. Each one widened the crack a little more. Each one added evidence to the case against his original belief. And Jonah who used to sit next to anyone, who used to believe that behind every cold shoulder was a wound, Jonah started to build walls. Not big ones. Not obvious ones. Just walls. He stopped volunteering for things. He stopped extending himself. He stopped sitting next to the person nobody sat next to, because sitting next to them meant opening himself up, and opening himself up meant getting hurt, and getting hurt was something he had accumulated enough data on to want to avoid. He called Patty every Sunday. She was still at the motel. Dale had retired. His back had finally won the argument, and they were living on his pension and Patty's income and the small, careful math of people who had never had enough but had always had each other. "You sound tired," Patty would say. "I'm fine." "You sound like something's missing." "I'm fine, Mom." He wasn't fine. But fine is the word we use when we don't want to explain the slow erosion of the thing that used to make us ourselves. He was 26 when he got the call. A Tuesday. 2:15 in the afternoon. His phone rang. The caller ID said Redfield Memorial Hospital. And the ground opened. Dale had called the ambulance. Patty had collapsed at the motel. Behind the front desk. Mid-sentence. Talking to a guest about the checkout time. She was unconscious before she hit the floor. Stroke. Massive. The kind that shuts down the brain in stages, the way a building loses power floor by floor during a blackout. Jonah drove to Redfield in 3 hours and 11 minutes. A drive that should have taken 4. He doesn't remember the drive. He remembers the hospital. The smell of it, that specific hospital smell, the one that's trying to cover up something terrible with something chemical and failing at both. He remembers the hallway, the fluorescent lights, the way his shoes sounded on the linoleum, squeaking like the floor was trying to hold him back. He remembers the room. Patty in the bed. Small. Smaller than he remembered. The way people look smaller when the thing that made them large, their voice, their warmth, their kindness, their presence, has been unplugged. Dale was in the chair next to the bed. He looked like a man who had been emptied. Like someone had reached inside him and removed everything that wasn't bone and left the rest sitting upright in a chair because it didn't know how to fall down yet. Jonah sat on the other side of the bed. He held Patty's hand. It was warm, which felt like a lie, because the monitors said things that warm hands shouldn't say. She didn't wake up. Not that day. Not the next. On the third day, Thursday, the doctor, a woman with kind eyes and a voice calibrated for delivering the worst news in the most survivable way, told Jonah and Dale that Patty's brain activity was minimal, that the damage was extensive, that the woman they knew, the woman who made soup for neighbors and remembered birthdays and let truckers use the lobby phone, that woman was, for all practical purposes, gone. They made the decision on Friday. Together. Dale and Jonah. In a small room with a social worker and a clipboard and the particular, awful bureaucracy of death in a hospital. Forms to sign, options to review, language so clinical it felt like an insult to the woman it described. They turned off the machines on Saturday morning. 9:17 a.m. Patty died at 9:22. 5 minutes. 5 minutes between the hum of the machines and the silence. 5 minutes between alive and not. 5 minutes that contained everything and nothing. And Jonah who had believed all people are good, Jonah who had sat next to Travis and Owen and every lonely kid in every cafeteria, Jonah whose mother had told him the right question isn't whether all people are good but whether you are. Jonah sat in that hospital room and held his mother's cooling hand and felt the crack inside him finally, fully, completely break. Not into anger. Not into bitterness. Into something worse. Into nothing. The gray, flat, dimensionless nothing of a person who has lost the thing that made them want to try. Patty was buried on a Wednesday. The funeral was small. Some co-workers from the motel. A few neighbors. The woman from the grocery store who Patty had been buying fish from for 20 years. Travis Dunmore's mother, who drove 3 hours to be there because Patty had once made her son a birthday cake when she couldn't afford to. And Owen. Owen Garrett was at the funeral. Jonah hadn't seen him in years. Not since high school. Owen had left Redfield at 17. Joined the military. Got out after 4 years. Was working construction in Indiana. He was bigger now. Filled out. The curtain of hair was gone. Cropped short, military style. But his eyes were the same. Still careful. Still guarded. But with something new underneath. Something that looked, from a certain angle, like peace. Not happiness. Not resolution. Just peace. The peace of a person who has done the work. Who has sat in the rooms and said the words and taken the medication and called the hotline and done every single difficult, unglamorous, unsexy thing that healing requires. Owen was the one who found Jonah. After the service. In the parking lot. Jonah was sitting in his car. Engine off. Hands on the wheel. Staring at nothing. Owen knocked on the window. Jonah looked up. And some old circuit, some dormant connection, some muscle memory from a cafeteria table and a ham sandwich and 2 hours in a hallway, fired. He opened the door. Owen didn't say, "I'm sorry for your loss." He didn't say, "She's in a better place." He didn't say any of the things people say at funerals that are meant to comfort, but actually just fill silence, because silence at funerals is unbearable for everyone except the person who's grieving, for whom silence is sometimes the only thing that makes sense. Owen said, "Can I sit with you?" And Jonah broke. He broke the way Owen had broken behind the door of apartment 312. The way Patty had broken in ways she hid with a watch and a smile. He broke open and everything came out. The alley, the dollar, the years of erosion, the walls he'd built, the belief he'd lost, the mother he'd buried, the boy he used to be who sat next to anyone because they looked like they needed someone. He told Owen everything. In a parking lot. In a car. On the worst day of his life. And Owen listened. The way Jonah had taught him to listen. By sitting. By staying. By being present without fixing. And when Jonah was done, when the words ran out and the tears slowed and the car was silent except for the sound of 2 men breathing in a small space, Owen said, "You saved my life, Jonah." Jonah looked at him. "That day in the hallway. When you sat outside my door. I had my dad's. I had taken something from my dad's room and I was sitting on my bed with it and I was going to end it. That day. That was going to be the day." Owen's voice was steady. The steadiness of a man who has said these words before. In therapy. In group. In the rooms where people tell truths that almost killed them. And you knocked. And you sat out there for 2 hours. And I could hear you breathing through the door. And I put it down. I put it down because someone was on the other side of the door and they weren't leaving. Jonah couldn't speak. You asked me once if all people are good. You didn't ask it directly, but that's what your whole life was asking. Every table you sat at. Every kid you chose. That was you asking, "Are you good? Are you good? Are you good?" Owen looked at Jonah. And for the first time in all the years Jonah had known him, Owen's eyes were completely open. No curtain. No force field. No wall. "I don't know if all people are good, Jonah. I don't think that's something anyone can know. But I know that you are. And I know that your goodness, your stupid, stubborn, beautiful goodness, kept me alive. Literally. Actually. Kept me breathing. And I need you to hear that. Today. On the day you buried the woman who made you that way. I need you to hear that your mother's kindness didn't just make the world nicer. It made the world possible. For me. Your mother is the reason I'm standing here." Jonah sat in his car in that parking lot and wept. Not the quiet crying of a man at a funeral. The deep, tectonic weeping of a man whose faith has been returned to him in a form he didn't expect and can barely hold. Because here's the twist. Here's the thing that changes everything. The story Jonah had been telling himself, the story that life taught him that not all people are good, that story was true. Life did teach him that. The alley taught him that. The roommate taught him that. The girlfriend taught him that. The manager taught him that. But that story was also incomplete. Because life had also taught him something else, something he'd been too hurt to see. Life had also taught him that his goodness, Patty's goodness, the goodness he inherited the way he inherited her brown eyes, his goodness had kept someone alive. His belief, the belief he'd abandoned, the belief he'd called naive, the belief he'd filed away as the foolishness of a child who hadn't learned yet how the world works, that belief had sat outside a door for 2 hours and kept a 14-year-old boy from killing himself. The world didn't teach Jonah that people aren't good. The world taught Jonah that people are complicated. That the same species that produces boys who take your dollar in an alley also produces boys who sit outside your door for 2 hours because you said you weren't okay. That the same world that takes your mother also sends Owen Garrett to a parking lot to tell you that your mother's life mattered in ways you never knew. That goodness isn't about whether other people deserve it. It's about whether you can survive giving it. And Patty knew this. Patty, with her scar and her watch and her 20 years at a motel where she was kind to strangers who sometimes didn't deserve it, Patty knew. That's why she said what she said that night. The right question isn't whether all people are good. The right question is whether you are. And whether you'll stay that way. Not because the world will reward you for it. Not because every person you help will thank you. Not because kindness guarantees safety or happiness or a life free from alley walls and stolen dollars. But because your goodness might be the only thing standing between someone and the worst decision they'll ever make. Your 2 hours in a hallway might be the only reason someone is breathing. Your ham sandwich at a cafeteria table might be the only proof someone has that they are worth sitting next to. You will never know. That's the brutal, beautiful, terrifying truth. You will never know which act of kindness is the one that matters. Which means you have to keep giving them. All of them. Even the ones that cost you. Even the ones that are never returned. Even the ones that leave you sitting in a parking lot wondering if any of it was worth it. Because somewhere, right now, today, at this moment, someone is sitting behind a closed door. And they are waiting to hear breathing on the other side. And they don't need you to be perfect. They don't need you to be strong. They don't need you to have answers or wisdom or a plan. They just need you to sit down and stay. Jonah Watts is 31 now. He lives in Columbus. He works at that same logistics company. He's a manager now, which means he finally has his own cubicle and a title that fits on a business card. He eats lunch in the break room. And he sits next to whoever is sitting alone. Every day. Not because he believes all people are good. He doesn't believe that anymore. He believes something harder. Something heavier. Something that costs more and pays less and requires a kind of courage that no one will ever give him credit for. He believes that it doesn't matter whether all people are good. What matters is that he is, and that he stays that way, even when the world makes it hard. Especially when the world makes it hard. Because that's what Patty taught him. Not with her words, though her words were perfect. With her life. With her soup and her birthdays and her free phone calls and her watch and her scar and her 20 years of radical, unsentimental, unglamorous kindness toward people who sometimes didn't deserve it and sometimes did and sometimes were just truckers on a highway who needed to hear a friendly voice. Patty Watts didn't teach her son that the world is good. She taught him something much more important. She taught him to be good in a world that isn't. And that stubborn, impossible, beautiful choice is the only thing that has ever kept the world from being worse than it already is. The next time someone tells you that all people are good, don't argue with them. Don't correct them. Don't give them the list of evidence that proves them wrong. Just let them be good. And if the world teaches them otherwise, and it will because it always does, be the person who sits outside their door. Be the breathing they hear through the wall. Be the 2 hours they didn't ask for but needed more than anything they've ever needed. Because the question was never whether all people are good. The question was always, only, forever, whether you are, and whether you'll stay.